I stood in the sterile HR office at Vantacorp, my promotion letter in hand, watching Sandra cross her arms and say the words that would change everything. "We don't negotiate with low-level employees, Ashley. Take the offer or leave. 3 years of 70-hour weeks, 3 patents with my name buried in footnotes. And they were offering me a 2% raise while my manager got credit for my algorithms." I looked at her smug face, at the unsigned promotion paperwork on her desk, and said the only word that mattered. Okay. I'm 29 years old, and 3 years ago I walked into Vantacorp with a master's degree in computational analytics and enough ambition to power a small city. The company is a mid-sized tech consulting firm tucked into downtown Austin, Texas. All glass windows and open floor plans that promised collaboration but delivered isolation. They hired me straight out of grad school, and I thought I'd found my dream job. My specialty was building predictive algorithms for client risk assessment. I loved the work. The puzzle of turning messy data into clean predictions, the satisfaction of watching my models outperform expectations. I worked under Derek, a manager 15 years my senior who had the kind of confidence that made you believe he knew what he was talking about. At first, I was grateful for his guidance. He'd review my work, nod approvingly, and tell me I had potential. But potential has a way of staying potential when someone else is collecting the rewards for your realized talent. The breaking point started 2 weeks before that HR meeting. I'd just completed a massive project for our biggest client, a Fortune 500 insurance company that was hemorrhaging money on fraudulent claims. I spent 8 months designing an algorithm that could flag suspicious patterns with 94% accuracy. The system saved them $12 million in its first year. $12 million. The client was ecstatic. Vantacorp was ecstatic. And my algorithm became the company's flagship product, the thing they pitched to every new prospect. Derek called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. The Austin sun was pouring through his windows, and he had his laptop turned toward me, showing an email from the VP. The subject line read, "Outstanding Innovation." The body of the email praised Derek's revolutionary thinking, his technical brilliance, his game-changing contribution to Vantacorp portfolio. My name appeared once, in the last paragraph, as part of the implementation team. "Great work on this," Derek said, as if he was being generous. "Really solid execution of the vision." I stared at that email, my throat tight. I'd conceived the vision. I'd built every line of code. I'd tested it, refined it, debugged it at 2 a.m. when Derek was home sleeping. But there he was, accepting praise for my innovation like it was his birthright. "Derek," I said carefully, "I appreciate the recognition, but that algorithm was my design from the ground up. Shouldn't my contribution be more clearly stated?" He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Ashley, you have to understand how these things work. I'm the senior leader on the project. Clients and executives need to see leadership taking ownership. But don't worry, your hard work is noticed. In fact, I'm putting you up for a promotion. Just be patient." Patient. I'd been patient for 3 years. I'd been patient through 2 other projects where my work got credited to Derek. I'd been patient when he presented my findings at conferences without mentioning my name. I'd been patient when colleagues congratulated him on innovations I'd dreamed up during sleepless nights. But he'd promised a promotion, and I wanted to believe the system worked. I wanted to believe that merit mattered, that documentation and results would speak for themselves. So I stayed patient for 2 more weeks while HR processed my promotion. When Sandra finally called me in, I walked into that beige office with my portfolio of evidence. I'd spent hours preparing. Market research showing that data analysts with my experience and track record were earning between $85,000 and $95,000 annually. I was making $62,000. I brought documentation of my 3 patents, all assigned to Vantacorp with Derek listed as the primary inventor despite his minimal involvement. I had printed client testimonial emails that specifically praised my responsiveness, my technical skill, my innovative thinking. Sandra barely glanced at my materials. She slid a single sheet of paper across her desk. Your promotion to data analyst 2. Congratulations. I looked at the numbers. Salary increase from $62,000 to $63,240. A 2% raise. No equity. No bonus structure change. No team leadership role. Just a slightly different title and an extra $1,200 spread across an entire year. This can't be right, I said. I've generated millions in value for this company. The market rate for someone with my skills and accomplishments is at least $85,000. Sandra folded her hands on her desk, her expression perfectly neutral. We have salary bands, Ashley. This is what junior-level positions receive. If you want more, you'll need to continue proving yourself over time. I'm not junior anymore, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been here 3 years. I've created the products this company is built on. Then you should be grateful we're promoting you at all. Her tone sharpened. Many companies wouldn't offer advancement this quickly. We don't negotiate with low-level employees. Take the offer or leave it. The words hit me like cold water. Low level. After 3 years of building their success, after creating the algorithms they sold to clients, after working weekends and holidays and through my younger brother's wedding because Derek said the project couldn't wait. Low level. I gathered my materials slowly, carefully. I need some time to think about this. Sandra shrugged. You have 48 hours to sign. After that, the offer expires. I walked out of that office, through the open floor plan where my colleagues were typing away at their desks, down the elevator, across the parking garage to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting the door open. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, staring at nothing. Then I pulled out my phone and saw the email that would change everything. The sender was Marcus Chen from Arctera Solutions, a competitor I'd met 6 months earlier at an industry conference. I'd given a presentation on algorithmic bias correction, discussing how to build predictive models that didn't perpetuate historical discrimination. Marcus had approached me afterward, genuinely excited about my work, and we'd stayed in touch through occasional emails about industry trends. His message was short. Remember our conversation about algorithmic auditing? We're launching a new division and want you to lead it. Interested in talking, I opened the attached offer letter with trembling fingers. Senior Consultant, Algorithmic Ethics and Compliance, salary, $95,000. Performance bonuses of up to 20%. Equity package that vested over 4 years. The position involved evaluating other companies' data systems for compliance with new federal regulations around algorithmic transparency and fairness. Then I read the next paragraph, and my heart stopped. Arctera had just been hired by Vantacorp to conduct their compliance audit. The federal government had implemented new algorithmic transparency regulations with a 90-day deadline, and Vantacorp needed external certification to prove their systems met the standards. I could walk away from the company that undervalued me and walk right back in as the auditor evaluating their compliance. I could examine the very algorithms I'd built, the ones Derek claimed as his own, the ones Vantacorp was too blind to properly value. The twist of fate was almost too perfect to believe. I read the offer 3 more times, making sure I understood correctly. Then I called my best friend Jordan, who worked in legal consulting and understood corporate politics better than anyone I knew. They said what? Jordan's voice was incredulous when I explained the HR meeting. 2%? For someone with your resume? Ashley, that's insulting. I know, but I've been there 3 years. I have relationships with my coworkers. What if I'm making a mistake by leaving? The mistake is staying, Jordan said firmly. They've shown you exactly who they are. Believe them. Take the Arctera offer and don't look back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was burning bridges, that I should try one more time to make Vantacorp see my value, that leaving meant admitting defeat. I spent the rest of the day paralyzed by indecision. by the fear of making the wrong choice, by the weight of 3 years that felt like they'd been wasted. Then I remembered Derek's face as he read that email praising his work. I remembered Sandra's dismissive tone. I remembered the phrase low-level employees. That night, I drafted my resignation letter. It took me 3 hours to write 2 paragraphs, trying to find words that were professional but honest. In the end, I kept it simple. I was grateful for the opportunity, but it accepted a position that better aligned with my career goals. I submitted it the next morning directly to Derek. Derek's office door was open when I arrived at 8:30, earlier than usual. He was scrolling through his phone, coffee in hand, looking relaxed. That changed the moment he saw me standing in his doorway. "Ashley." "Morning. What's up?" I handed him the printed resignation letter. "I wanted to tell you in person. I've accepted another position. My last day will be 2 weeks from Friday." He took the letter, read it once, then again. His expression cycled through shock to confusion to something that looked almost like panic before settling on dismissive condescension. "You're making a mistake," he said, setting the letter down carefully. "What company is going to value a junior analyst with only 3 years of experience? Not, why are you leaving? Not, what can we do to keep you? Not even basic curiosity about my reasons. Just immediate certainty that I was wrong and he was right. I've found an opportunity that recognizes my contributions," I said evenly. "I appreciate everything I've learned here." Derek leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good luck out there, Ashley. The real world is a lot harder than you think." I left his office feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified. By noon, Sandra had sent me a form email acknowledging my resignation with 0 personal commentary. No exit interview scheduled, no questions asked. Just a generic "we wish you well in your future endeavors" that could have been sent to anyone. The next 2 weeks were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Derek removed me from every active project immediately. No transition period, no knowledge transfer, just an abrupt severing of my involvement in the work it'd been building. He reassigned me to documentation duty, having me write technical manuals for systems I'd designed but was no longer allowed to touch. It was busy work dressed up as responsibility, and everyone knew it. The cold shoulder from my coworkers was worse. People I'd eaten lunch with for 3 years suddenly had urgent meetings when I approached. The break room would go quiet when I walked in. I caught whispers behind hands, saw eyes sliding away when I looked up. One colleague, Brenda from accounting, had the decency to tell me the truth. She found me in the parking garage one evening as I was leaving. "I thought you should know," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. "Derek's been telling people you couldn't handle the pressure. That you're leaving because the work was too advanced for your skill level." My stomach dropped. "That's not true. I built most of what this company runs on." "I know," Brenda said. "A lot of us know. But Derek's senior management, and you're leaving. People believe what they want to believe." I drove home that night shaking with anger. Derek wasn't content to let me leave quietly. He was actively rewriting history, protecting his reputation at the expense of mine. And there was nothing I could do about it because I'd already resigned. Fighting back would look like sour grapes, like a disgruntled employee lashing out, so I kept my head down for 2 more weeks. I documented everything I'd built with meticulous detail, partly because it was the professional thing to do and partly because I had a feeling I might need that documentation someday. I responded to Derek's condescension with polite professionalism. I smiled at colleagues who avoided me and reminded myself I'd be gone soon. On my last day, Sandra conducted the exit interview. It was perfunctory, mechanical, the same questions she probably asked everyone. Why was I leaving? Career growth opportunities. What did I think Vantacorp could improve? Nothing specific comes to mind. Would I recommend Vantacorp to others? Sure. I gave her the answers that wouldn't burn bridges, that kept doors theoretically open, that maintained the fiction that this was an amicable parting. At the end, Sandra actually smiled. "Well, Ashley, we wish you luck. The door is always open if you realize this was premature." The condescension in that statement, the assumption that I'd come crawling back when my mistake became apparent, was almost funny. Almost. I packed my desk that afternoon. 3 years of work fitting into 2 cardboard boxes. A cactus plant Jordan had given me as a housewarming gift. A framed photo of my family. A coffee mug from a conference it attended. The physical evidence of 3 years was shockingly sparse. As I was taping up the last box, I heard voices from the conference room next door. The wall was thin, and Derek was on a phone call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his voice carried. "Don't worry about the insurance algorithm," he was saying. "I can handle the updates myself. Ashley was just doing implementation work. I did all the real thinking, all the strategic development." I froze, box in hand. "Actually," Derek continued, his voice dropping slightly, "I'm a little concerned. She might have stolen proprietary code. We should probably have legal review her access logs. Make sure she didn't take anything with her." The world tilted. Derek wasn't just dismissing my contributions anymore. He was laying groundwork to accuse me of theft. If the algorithm failed without me, if clients started having problems, he'd blame me and claim I'd sabotaged it on my way out. My mind raced. I had documentation of everything I'd built, but it was all on Vantacorp servers. My work laptop would be wiped the moment I turned it in. I had minutes, maybe less, before my access credentials were deactivated at 5 o'clock. I set down the box and pulled out my phone. Opened my work email and forwarded key messages to my personal account. Not code, not proprietary information, just emails that showed my role in projects, client feedback that mentioned my name, documentation of the work I'd done. I photographed my clean access logs, showing normal usage patterns with no suspicious downloads or transfers. At 4:58, I hit send on the last email forward. At 5 o'clock exactly, my work laptop displayed an access denied message. I carried my boxes to my car, turned in my badge and laptop to security, and drove out of the Vantacorp parking garage for what I thought was the last time. I was wrong about that. 3 weeks later, I walked through Arctera Solutions' glass doors on a Monday morning and felt like I could finally breathe. The office was nothing like Vantacorp. Same Austin location, different universe. Where Vantacorp had been all corporate beige and forced cheerfulness, Arctera felt genuinely collaborative. The workspace was bright and open, but people actually talked to each other instead of performing productivity. The walls displayed work from local artists. The break room had a real espresso machine and fresh fruit instead of stale donuts. Marcus met me in the lobby personally, something I couldn't imagine Derek ever doing. He was in his mid-40s, wearing jeans and a blazer, radiating the kind of calm confidence that doesn't need to prove itself. "Ashley, welcome to the team. Come on, I'll introduce you around." He walked me through the office, introducing me to developers, consultants, analysts. Each person looked up from their work with genuine interest when Marcus said, "This is Ashley, our new senior audit specialist. She's going to be leading the algorithmic compliance division." Senior. Not junior, not entry level, not someone who needed to prove herself over time. Senior. We settled into a conference room for my first official briefing. Marcus pulled up a presentation on the large monitor. "Okay, let's talk about your first major project. You're familiar with the new federal regulations on algorithmic transparency and fairness, right?" I nodded. The regulations had been implemented 3 months earlier, requiring companies using predictive algorithms to document their decision-making processes, test for discriminatory outcomes, and ensure their systems met basic fairness standards. Companies had 90 days to achieve compliance or face substantial penalties. "Perfect," Marcus continued. "We've been hired to conduct compliance audits for several firms that need external certification. Your first client is one I specifically wanted you on. He clicked to the next slide, and my breath caught. The Vantacorp logo filled the screen. They approached us 4 weeks ago, Marcus explained. They're 60 days into the compliance period and realize they don't have the internal expertise to meet the standards. They need a comprehensive audit of their algorithmic systems, particularly their flagship insurance risk assessment tool, the insurance algorithm. My algorithm. The one Derek claimed had developed. Marcus looked at me carefully. I know you worked there until recently. That's actually why I thought you'd be perfect for this. You understand their systems. But I need to ask directly. Can you approach this audit objectively and professionally? I met his eyes. Absolutely. In fact, my familiarity with their systems means I know exactly what to look for and where the problems are likely to be. I can be more thorough than an auditor going in blind. That's what I thought, Marcus said. We've disclosed your prior employment to Vantacorp Legal Counsel, and they've approved. You'll be lead auditor with 2 junior associates supporting you. He introduced me to Tyler and Samantha, both recent graduates with degrees in data science and ethics. They were smart, eager, and looked at me like I actually knew what I was doing. It was refreshing and slightly terrifying. I spent the next week preparing for the audit. I reviewed the federal regulations line by line, created comprehensive audit frameworks, developed assessment methodologies, and built testing protocols. I approached it with the same meticulous attention it brought to building the algorithm itself. But now I was on the other side, looking for flaws instead of creating solutions. The night before we were scheduled to start the on-site audit, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios, wondering how Derek would react, how Sandra would treat me, whether walking back into Vantacorp would feel like defeat or victory. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, unusual for Austin in late spring. I dressed carefully in a sharp navy suit, pulled my hair back in a professional bun, and loaded my Arctera-branded tablet with all the documentation we'd need. Tyler and Samantha met me in the parking lot at Vantacorp, both nervous and excited. Ready? I asked them. Following your lead, Tyler said. We walked through those familiar glass doors, and I was surprised by how different it felt. I wasn't an employee anymore, hoping to be noticed. I was an external consultant, here to do a job, backed by Arctera's authority and my own expertise. The receptionist did a visible double-take when she saw me. Her name was Patricia, and we'd exchanged pleasantries hundreds of times over 3 years. Ashley? I thought you left. I did, I said calmly. I'm back as the external auditor from Arctera Solutions. We're here to see Derek about the compliance audit. Patricia's mouth opened slightly, then closed. I'll let his assistant know you're here. We waited in the lobby, Tyler and Samantha reviewing their notes, while I controlled my breathing and reminded myself this was professional, this was business, this was about the work. Derek's assistant Monica appeared in the lobby within 5 minutes. She went pale when she saw me. Ashley, I didn't realize you'd be conducting the audit. It's good to see you, Monica. Is Derek available? She nodded mutely and led us to the elevator. The ride up to the 3rd floor felt endless. Monica kept glancing at me sideways, clearly dying to ask questions but maintaining professional silence. Derek was in a morning meeting when we arrived at his office suite. Monica knocked tentatively on his door, interrupting whatever discussion was happening inside. Derek? The auditors from Arctera are here. I heard his voice before I saw him. Finally. Send them to the conference room. I'll be right there. Monica led us to conference room B, the same room where I'd presented countless projects over 3 years. Tyler and Samantha set up our equipment, while I stood by the window, looking out at the Austin skyline, steadying myself. When Derek walked in, his face went through a fascinating progression of emotions. Shock, confusion, recognition. Then something that might have been fear before settling into barely concealed anger. Ashley. My name came out flat. Accusatory. Nobody told me you'd be conducting this audit. I turned from the window and extended my hand professionally. Derek, good to see you. I'm the lead auditor from Arctera Solutions. This is Tyler and Samantha, my associates. We'll need full access to all algorithmic documentation, including source code, development notes, and decision logs. His handshake was clammy and brief. This is highly irregular. You just worked here 4 weeks ago, which is why Arctera disclosed my prior employment to your legal team. They reviewed and approved. We're here to ensure Vantacorp meets federal compliance standards, nothing more. I kept my voice calm and professional. Shall we begin? Derek's jaw tightened. I need to make some calls first. Monica will show you to your workspace. He left the conference room quickly, and I could hear him on his phone in the hallway. Voice low and urgent. Tyler raised his eyebrows at me. I shook my head slightly. Let Derek make his calls. We had legal authorization and executive approval. There was nothing he could do to stop this audit. 20 minutes later, Derek returned with Patricia, Vantacorp legal counsel. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd always been professional with me. Ashley, I need to confirm some details about potential conflicts of interest, Patricia said. I walked her through Arctera's disclosure process, showed her Marcus' communication with Vantacorp General Counsel, and explained my role. Patricia reviewed everything carefully, then nodded. Everything appears to be in order. Derek, you'll need to provide the auditors with whatever access they require. It's contractual. Derek's face was a mask of controlled frustration. Of course, I'll be overseeing this audit personally. As the primary architect of our systems, I need to ensure accuracy. That's when I saw my opening and took it. Actually, I said, pulling up the federal regulations on my tablet. Section 12.3 requires that the lead developer be interviewed separately from the documentation review to avoid bias. You'll be interviewed as a subject matter expert, but you can't oversee the audit itself. It compromises the independence of the assessment. I showed Patricia the relevant section. She read it and nodded. Ashley's correct. Derek, you'll need to provide access but cannot be present during the actual review. Derek looked like he'd been slapped. That's ridiculous. These are my systems. These are Vantacorp systems, I corrected gently. And we need to audit them objectively. We'll start with the insurance algorithm. I'll need all documentation showing the development process from initial conception through final deployment. Derek's face went from red to pale. That will take some time to gather. We have 4 weeks for this audit, I said. But the insurance algorithm is your flagship product and the primary focus of the compliance review. I'd expect that documentation to be readily available. The truth hung in the air between us. Derek knew and I knew that the documentation didn't exist. Not because it had been lost or misfiled, but because Derek had never created it. He couldn't document a development process he hadn't actually done. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek looked genuinely afraid. I'll have Monica start pulling files, he said finally. It may take a few days to locate everything. That's fine, I said. We'll start with your other client projects first and circle back to the insurance algorithm. Tyler, let's begin with the retail analytics system. Derek, we'll need the documentation for that by end of business today. Derek nodded stiffly and left the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see him on his phone again, pacing, gesturing sharply. Samantha leaned toward me. Is it always like this? No, I said honestly. This is actually going better than I expected. The first week of the audit was like peeling back layers of a glossy facade to reveal rot underneath. Tyler and Samantha were excellent researchers, thorough and detail-oriented. We worked systematically through Vantacorp client projects, starting with the smaller systems and building toward the insurance algorithm. Every day revealed new problems. The retail analytics system had no bias testing records. The healthcare prediction model lacked validation protocols. The financial risk assessment tool made decisions based on variables that weren't documented anywhere. In every case, the systems worked in a technical sense but failed to meet basic transparency standards required by the new regulations. And in every case, when I asked for development documentation, I got the same response. We're still locating those files. By Wednesday of the first week, I'd established a pattern. I'd request specific documents in the morning. Derek would promise they were being gathered. By end of day, Monica would deliver partial files that raised more questions than they answered. When I'd ask for clarification, Derek would either be unavailable or would give vague responses about proprietary processes that couldn't be fully documented. It was obvious what was happening. The documentation didn't exist because Derek had never created it. And Derek had never created it because he didn't understand the systems well enough to document them properly. On Thursday afternoon, I started my technical review of the insurance algorithm's source code. This was the part I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. I knew this code intimately. I'd written it, debugged it, optimized it over 8 months of intensive work. What I found made my hands shake. The algorithm was making decisions based on proxy variables that correlated with protected classes, zip codes that mapped to predominantly Black or Hispanic neighborhoods, first names that statistical analysis could link to ethnicity, purchasing patterns that revealed disability status, credit scores that reflected generational poverty rather than individual risk. None of it was explicitly discriminatory. The algorithm never said deny this person because of their race or charge this person more because of their gender. But the outcomes were discriminatory. People from certain zip codes got flagged as higher risk, regardless of their actual behavior. People with certain first names received less favorable terms. The disparate impact was clear and measurable, and it was exactly what the new federal regulations were designed to prevent. I felt sick. Not because I'd built something intentionally harmful, but because I'd built something that had harmful effects I hadn't fully tested for. I'd focused on accuracy, on fraud detection, on saving the client money. I hadn't thought deeply enough about fairness, about who was bearing the cost of that accuracy. This was my fault too. Not just Derek's, not just Vanticor. Mine. Tyler found me in the conference room at 6 in the evening, staring at the code analysis on my screen. "You okay?" he asked. "This algorithm is discriminatory," I said quietly. "Not intentionally, but the impact is real. And I built it." He sat down across from me. "But you're also the one who found it. You're the one documenting it so it can be fixed. That matters." I wanted to believe him. I documented everything meticulously over the next 2 days. The proxy variables, the disparate impact analysis, the correlation between algorithm decisions and protected class membership. Every test I ran confirmed the same conclusion. The insurance algorithm was technically sophisticated and legally problematic. This wasn't just a compliance failure. This was a liability exposure that could cost Vanticorp tens of millions of dollars if regulators investigated. If affected, customers sued. If the insurance client realized what they'd been using, Derek became increasingly desperate as the audit progressed. He started trying to limit my access, claiming proprietary concerns about competitors seeing sensitive information. I escalated to Patrick, Vanticor legal counsel, who overruled Derek immediately. "She's conducting a federally mandated audit," Patrick told him in a meeting I wasn't supposed to overhear. "She gets full access. That's non-negotiable." Derek tried to sit in on my interviews with the development team. I excluded him per audit protocol. The junior developers, freed from Derek's presence, started telling me the truth. "We always wondered why Derek got all the credit," one of them told me. "His name was James, a programmer 2 years out of college. You designed everything. We thought you'd at least be listed as co-developer on the patents. Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. James looked uncomfortable. "Derek's senior management. You were junior. Who would have listened?" In week 3, I needed employee records to verify who had worked on which projects. That meant going back to Sandra in HR. Her office hadn't changed. Same beige walls, same artificial plant in the corner, same cold efficiency. Sandra looked up when I knocked, and her expression went glacial. What do you need? No greeting, no pretense of professionalism. I need employment records for the development team, project assignments, email archives, and performance reviews for the last 3 years. Sandra leaned back in her chair. That's confidential employee information. I handed her the legal authorization signed by Patrick. This gives me access to all relevant personnel records as part of the compliance audit. She took the document, read it slowly, her jaw tightening. Fine. I'll have them prepared by tomorrow. I need them today, I said calmly. We're on a strict timeline. I'll see what I can do. Her tone made it clear she'd do the minimum required, and not one thing more. I waited in the conference room while Sandra had someone pull files. 3 hours later, Monica delivered a box of personnel records. I started reviewing them immediately, building a timeline of who had worked on what projects and when. That's when I found it. Buried in Derek's personnel file, sandwiched between performance reviews and promotion paperwork, was a formal complaint dated 8 months earlier. The complainant was Grace Liu, a data analyst who'd worked on the retail analytics project. I remembered Grace vaguely. Quiet, brilliant, had left Vantacorp suddenly, around the same time this complaint was filed. The complaint was detailed and damning. Grace had designed a recommendation engine for a major retail client. She'd documented her process meticulously, shared updates in team meetings, and delivered the project on time and under budget. 2 weeks after deployment, Derek had presented the work at an industry conference, claiming full credit for the innovation. When Grace confronted him, he told her that junior employees didn't get individual recognition, that it was teamwork, that she should be grateful for the experience. Grace had filed a formal complaint with HR, including email evidence, meeting notes, and testimony from colleagues who'd witnessed her work. Sandra had investigated and found the claims credible. Her recommendation to the VP, written warning for Derek, and mandatory management training. But the VP had overridden the recommendation. Instead, Grace had been transferred to a different team to avoid ongoing conflict. Derek had faced no consequences. The complaint had been buried in his file with a note that it was resolved through alternative means. I read the documents 3 times, my hands shaking. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Derek had built his career by taking credit for women's work. And when those women complained, Vantacorp had protected him and silenced them. I'd been patient with Derek because I thought my situation was unique, that I'd somehow failed to communicate my contributions clearly enough. But Grace had communicated perfectly. She'd documented everything. She'd followed the proper channels. And she'd been punished for it. Sandra had been complicit in burying the complaint. She'd found it credible, recommended action, and then watched as her recommendation was ignored and the victim was blamed. I photographed every page of Grace's complaint. Then I kept reading. There were 2 more complaints in Derek's file from previous years. Different women, similar stories. Same outcome. Transfer the complainant. Protect Derek. Bury the documentation. Vantacorp didn't have a compliance problem. It had a culture problem. And that culture problem had infected every system, every algorithm, every process I was auditing. This audit wasn't just about technical standards anymore. It was about a toxic pattern of devaluing women's contributions and protecting men who took credit for their work. I closed the personnel file and sat in the empty conference room as the sun set over Austin. Tyler and Samantha had gone home hours ago. The office was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. I thought about Sandra's words in the exit interview. The door is always open if you realize this was premature. She'd known Derek was taking credit for my work because he'd done it before. She'd known the promotion offer was insulting because she'd seen the market data. She'd known I'd leave, and she hadn't cared because protecting senior management was more important than retaining talented junior staff. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting a preliminary report. The technical violations were clear and documented. The personnel issues were clear and documented. The risk assessment was straightforward. Vantacorp was sitting on a massive liability exposure, and they had no idea how deep it went. It was time to tell them. I scheduled the presentation with Vantacorp executive team for Monday morning of week 4. Patrick helped me coordinate, and I could hear the tension in his voice when he confirmed attendance. The CEO will be there, he said. Harold doesn't usually attend operational audits, but I told him this one required his attention. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed in my most professional suit, reviewed my presentation 3 times, and arrived at Vantacorp an hour early to set up. Tyler and Samantha helped me test the equipment and organize the handouts. At 9 o'clock, the executives filed in. Harold, the CEO, was in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded rooms. Christine, the VP, was sharp-eyed and impeccably dressed. Derek looked like he hadn't slept, his tie slightly crooked. Sandra sat near the back, her expression unreadable. Patrick took the seat closest to the door, laptop open. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Over the past 4 weeks, my team has conducted a comprehensive audit of Vantacorp algorithmic systems against federal compliance standards. What we've found requires immediate attention and executive-level decision-making." I walked them through the technical findings methodically, showed them side-by-side comparisons of what the regulations required versus what Vantacorp had, displayed the missing documentation, the absent testing protocols, the failed validation procedures, used clear data visualizations to demonstrate the problems. Then I got to the insurance algorithm. "This is your flagship product," I said, pulling up the bias analysis results. "It's also your biggest liability." I showed them the proxy variables, the disparate impact data, the correlation analyses, explained how the algorithm was making decisions that had discriminatory effects on protected classes, walked them through specific examples of how zip code, first name, and purchasing pattern variables were functioning as proxies for race, ethnicity, and disability status. "The algorithm is technically sophisticated," I said. "It's also potentially illegal under the new regulations. My recommendation is immediate suspension of the system until a complete redesign addresses these fairness concerns." The room was silent. Harold's face had gone carefully neutral. Christine was taking notes furiously. Derek tried to interrupt. "Ashley, I think you're misinterpreting the technical details here. The algorithm uses those variables for legitimate predictive purposes." I turned to him calmly. "Would you like to explain the decision tree logic on slide 12? Since you developed the algorithm, you should be able to walk us through why those specific variables were chosen and how they relate to actual risk assessment." Derek opened his mouth, closed it. "I'd need to review my development notes." "Your development notes," I said carefully, "are what we've been requesting for 4 weeks. We haven't received them because they don't exist. Isn't that right?" Christine looked up from her notes. "Derek, this is your flagship product. You've presented on it at conferences. You should know this cold." Derek fumbled for words. "The technical details are complex. I focused on strategic direction rather than implementation specifics." "Strategic direction," I repeated. "Can you tell us what the strategic direction was for including zip code as a weighted variable in the risk assessment?" Silence. Harold leaned forward. "Derek, answer the question." "I'd need to consult with my team," Derek said finally. The energy in the room shifted. The executives were starting to realize that Derek didn't understand the system head claimed to create. Patrick cleared his throat. "Ashley, you mentioned these compliance failures aren't isolated to the insurance algorithm." "Correct," I said. Advancing to the next slide, I found similar patterns across 3 other major client projects: missing documentation, absent testing protocols, undocumented decision variables. The technical debt is substantial. Then I took a breath and made the decision I'd been wrestling with all weekend. I also found something else, I said. With your permission, Patrick, I'd like to address a personnel issue that's directly relevant to these compliance failures. Patrick nodded slowly. Go ahead. I pulled up the documentation from Grace's complaint, properly anonymized but with key details intact. Vantacorp has a documented pattern of senior employees taking credit for work done by junior staff, particularly women. When complaints are filed through proper channels, they're investigated and found credible. But instead of addressing the issue, the complainants are transferred, and the senior employees face no consequences. I looked directly at Sandra. This pattern has been repeated at least 3 times in the past 3 years that I can document, and it's directly related to your compliance failures. Sandra sat up straight. That complaint was handled appropriately through internal HR processes. Was it? I asked. The analyst who filed the complaint left the company 2 weeks later. The senior employee she accused continues to take credit for others' work. How is that appropriate? Harold held up a hand. Ashley, what does this have to do with algorithmic compliance? Everything, I said. When you tell people they're too junior to matter, too junior to get credit, too junior to negotiate, they stop caring about quality. They stop documenting properly. They stop building systems with the level of care that compliance requires. You've created a culture where the people doing the actual technical work have no incentive to do it well because they know someone else will take credit for success and blame them for failure. I pulled up the final slide. The only reason I can conduct this audit effectively is because I actually built these systems. I documented them properly, even when no one cared, because I'm a professional, and that's what professionals do. But that documentation never made it into official records because Derek claimed the work as his own, and Vantacorp accepted that claim without verification. The room was completely silent. My preliminary assessment, I continued, is that Vantacorp faces between $20 and $50 million in potential regulatory penalties and civil liability if these issues aren't addressed immediately. That's assuming no one has been actively harmed yet and that you can demonstrate good faith efforts to remediate. Christine stood up suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. I need to say something, Harold. Her voice was tight. 2 months ago, Derek came to me with concerns about the insurance algorithm. He said it needed updates, but he wasn't sure how to implement them without Ashley. I asked him why he couldn't do it himself, and he told me he'd developed everything, that Ashley had just been following his instructions. She looked at Derek with something close to fury. I believed him. I told him to figure it out. But the truth is, he couldn't figure it out because he never understood it in the first place. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through emails, and held it up. The client emailed me last week. They're having accuracy problems with claim predictions. Error rates are up 18% since Ashley left. 18%. I didn't connect the dots until right now. The room erupted. Harold was demanding explanations. Patrick was typing frantically. Derek was trying to speak, but no one was listening to him. Sandra sat frozen, her face pale. I stood quietly at the front of the room and watched Vantacorp leadership structure fracture. Finally, Harold raised his voice. Everyone, stop. Silence fell gradually. Harold looked at me. Ashley, can this be fixed? Yes, I said simply. But not by Derek. He doesn't understand the systems well enough to fix them. Can you fix them? I'd been waiting for this question. I can recommend remediation strategies as part of my audit. Implementation would be up to Vantacorp. Harold studied me for a long moment. We need to talk. Harold called an executive session immediately. He asked me to wait in the conference room while they discussed the situation. Derek and Sandra were not invited. I sat alone for 90 minutes, Tyler and Samantha having gone to get lunch. I watched the Austin skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows and thought about how different this moment felt from 3 months ago. Then, I'd sat in Sandra's office, feeling powerless and small. Now, I sat in the executive conference room having just dismantled Derek's career with nothing but documentation and truth. When Harold returned, Christine and Patrick were with him. Derek and Sandra were notably absent. Harold sat across from me and folded his hands on the table. Ashley, we need your help. The insurance client is threatening to leave. The algorithm is failing. We have 60 days until the federal compliance deadline. And based on what you've shown us, we can't meet that deadline without significant expertise we apparently don't have internally. He slid a contract across the table. I picked it up and read carefully. Director of Algorithmic Development. Salary $135,000. Full equity package vesting over 4 years. 4 weeks paid time off. Comprehensive benefits. And the kicker: a public acknowledgement of my authorship on all previous projects, including the 3 patents currently listing Derek as primary inventor. Christine leaned forward. Derek is being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Sandra is being reassigned to a different role. You would report directly to me. We'd give you full authority to rebuild the team and fix these systems. It was everything it wanted 3 months ago. More than it wanted, actually. Triple the salary Sandra had offered. The recognition I deserved. The authority to do the job right. They were offering me Derek's position, essentially, with better compensation and actual respect. I looked at the contract, at the desperate faces of the executives who suddenly realized how badly they needed me, and I felt nothing but clarity. I appreciate this offer, Harold, I said, setting the contract down. 3 months ago, I would have cried with gratitude. But here's what I've learned in these past few months. I stood up, gathering my materials. I don't want to work for a company that only values me when they're desperate, that only respects me when I walk in with someone else's badge and audit authority. That needed a compliance crisis to recognize what I told you in Sandra's office 3 months ago. Harold looked stunned. Ashley, we're trying to make this right. You're trying to save your company, I corrected gently. And I respect that. It's your job. But my job is to respect myself enough not to settle for conditional recognition. Christine spoke up. What would make this acceptable to you? I considered that. It'll help you. As a consultant, through Arcterra Solutions, I laid out my terms. $200 per hour. 6-week engagement to fix the insurance algorithm, rebuild the documentation, and create compliance systems that would meet federal standards. Plus 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, Vantacorp issues a public statement acknowledging my authorship of all 3 patents. Second, Derek signs a declaration admitting he misappropriated my work, and that declaration becomes part of the permanent record. Third, you implement mandatory management training around intellectual property attribution and create a junior employee advocacy committee with real authority to investigate complaints. Harold looked pained. That's expensive. So are regulatory penalties, I said evenly. And so is losing your biggest client. And so is the lawsuit Grace Liu could file once she hears about the pattern of behavior you've documented in Derek's personnel file. Patrick winced. Harold and Christine exchanged glances. Done, Harold said finally. All of it. Can you start this week? I'll have Arcterra send over the consulting agreement, I said. Tyler and Samantha will continue as my associates on this engagement. I'll need complete access and full cooperation from your technical team. And I'll need Derek completely removed from any involvement. He won't be a problem. Christine said with an edge to her voice that suggested Derek's departure from Vantacorp was going to be permanent. I left the building an hour later with a signed consulting agreement, a scope of work, and the strange feeling of having won a battle I hadn't fully known I was fighting. In the parking garage, I nearly ran into Derek. He was loading boxes into his car. Personal items from his office, apparently. He looked haggard, his tie gone, his shirt rumpled. When he saw me, his expression twisted into something ugly. You destroyed my career, Ashley. I stopped walking. No, Derek. You destroyed your own career by taking credit for work you didn't do. I just stopped protecting you. I gave you opportunities, he said bitterly. I hired you. You owe me. I owed you good work. And I gave it to you. The best work I was capable of. You owed me honesty and credit. And you gave me nothing. I kept my voice calm. We're done here. I started to walk away, but he grabbed my arm. You think you're so smart. You think this is over. But I have connections in this industry. I'll make sure everyone knows you're vindictive, that you can't be trusted. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Let go of me, Derek. He released me, seeming to realize how bad that had looked. If you try to damage my reputation, I said quietly, I'll release Grace's complaint publicly, and the other 2 complaints in your file, and the documentation showing Vantacorp knew about your behavior and protected you. Try me. I walked to my car and drove away without looking back. That night, Marcus called from Arcterra. Ashley, I don't know what you did, but my phone has been ringing off the hook. 3 companies called today asking if you could audit their algorithmic systems. 2 more sent emails. They all heard about your Vantacorp audit through industry channels. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. The consulting engagement you just signed with Vantacorp is only the beginning, Marcus continued. Companies are realizing they need external auditors who can actually find problems, not consultants who tell them what they want to hear. You've positioned yourself as the auditor they can trust. He paused. I want to make you a partner, Ashley. Build your own division. Algorithmic ethics and compliance under your direction. You choose your clients. Set your rates. Build your team. What do you say? I sat in my car on the side of the road, watching the Austin traffic flow by, and realized that I'd walked away from a rejection that had tried to define me as low-level and disposable, and I'd walked into a career where I was being offered partnership and autonomy. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. 6 weeks passed in a blur of intensive work. I rebuilt the insurance algorithm from the ground up, removing the problematic proxy variables and replacing them with genuinely predictive factors that had no correlation to protected classes. I implemented fairness testing protocols, built comprehensive documentation, and trained Vantacorp technical team on compliance requirements. The error rate dropped to 6% below pre-departure levels. The algorithm was more accurate and more fair. The insurance client was thrilled. They renewed their contract and doubled their investment in Vantacorp services. Vantacorp passed the federal compliance audit with only minor recommendations for improvement. Patrick told me later that the auditor had specifically praised the quality of their documentation and testing protocols, and Vantacorp kept their promises. They issued a press release acknowledging me as the primary inventor on all 3 patents. The company blog featured a post titled Recognizing Unsung Contributors that highlighted my work and announced their new Junior Employee Advocacy Committee. Derek's signed declaration, admitting to intellectual property, misappropriation was filed with the Patent Office and became part of the public record. Derek himself disappeared from the Austin tech scene. I heard through former colleagues that Head moved to Phoenix and taken a job outside the industry. I didn't feel sorry for him. It'd given him 3 years of exceptional work and Head given me condescension and theft. We were even. Sandra remained at Vantacorp but was moved to a benefits administration role with no personnel authority. I never spoke to her again. But Grace reached out. She sent me an email 2 months after my Vantacorp audit went public. She thanked me for exposing the pattern Shed tried to report. She told me Shed found a better position at a company that valued her work. We met for coffee and discovered we had similar experiences, similar frustrations, similar hopes for changing the industry culture. Grace became one of my first hires when I built my division at Arcterra. Building the algorithmic ethics and compliance division was the most satisfying work of my career. I hired carefully, looking for people who combined technical expertise with genuine ethical commitment. Tyler and Samantha were my first 2 consultants. Grace joined as a senior analyst. Within 3 months, We were a team of 6. Within 6 months, my division became Arcterra's fastest-growing business unit. Companies across the country were realizing they needed external audits of their algorithmic systems, and they wanted auditors who would actually find problems, not rubber stamp existing processes. Within a year, I was consulting for Fortune 500 companies nationwide, commanding rates that would have seemed impossible when I was sitting in Sandra's office accepting that 2% raise. But the money wasn't the satisfying part. The satisfying part was the culture I was building. One afternoon, about 8 months after leaving Vantacorp, I sat in my office with Jordan over coffee. My office had a view of downtown Austin and walls covered with whiteboards full of project plans and algorithm designs. "You know what I learned through all of this?" I said. "My value isn't determined by whether someone else recognizes it. It exists whether they see it or not." Jordan smiled. "And now everyone sees it." "No," I said. "Now I see it. And that's what matters." I explained what I meant. I'd spent 3 years at Vantacorp seeking validation from people who were never going to give it to me. I'd confused loyalty with self-sacrifice. I'd believed that working harder would eventually earn respect, that exceptional performance would speak for itself. But respect doesn't come from working harder. Respect comes from respecting yourself enough to walk away from people who don't value you. "Derek taught me something important," I said. "He showed me that some people will never see your worth because seeing it would require them to admit their own inadequacy. And that's not your problem to fix?" Jordan raised her coffee cup. "To not fixing other people's problems." We clinked cups. The most unexpected development came 3 months after I finished the Vantacorp consulting engagement. Harold called and asked if I'd be willing to serve on their advisory board. I almost said no automatically. But when we met to discuss it, I realized Vantacorp had genuinely changed. Harold had brought in diversity and inclusion consultants. The Junior Employee Advocacy Committee had already resolved 6 complaints and implemented structural changes to project attribution. The company had made algorithmic transparency a core value, training every employee on bias awareness and fair development practices. "I'm not asking you to come back as an employee," Harold said. "I'm asking you to help us stay accountable, to keep us honest, to make sure we don't slip back into old patterns." I agreed to join the advisory board, not as a return to Vantacorp, but as a collaboration between equals. I could influence positive change from a position of respect and authority rather than from a position of hoping to be noticed. My work expanded beyond auditing. I started speaking at conferences about algorithmic bias in workplace advocacy. I wrote articles for industry publications about intellectual property attribution and the importance of recognizing junior employees' contributions. Young women in tech reached out constantly, sharing their stories of being undervalued, asking for advice. My message was always the same: know your worth. Document your work. Don't wait for permission to value yourself. I mentored dozens of junior analysts who felt trapped in situations like mine. Many ended up joining my team. Others launched their own consulting practices. A few even started advocacy organizations focused on fair attribution in technical fields. 1 year after leaving Vantacorp, I sat in my corner office at Arcterra on a Friday evening. Most of the team had gone home, but I stayed late, reviewing proposals for new client engagements. My office was decorated with awards the division had won, framed articles I'd published, photos of my team at various conferences and celebrations. I thought about Sandra's words that day in HR. "We don't negotiate with low-level employees." The profound truth I'd learned was this: I'd never been low-level. The only thing that had been low-level was their vision of what I could become. By walking away, I'd freed myself from a ceiling that existed only in their minds. I'd discovered that sometimes the best negotiation is the one you walk away from. That evening, I recorded a video for my division's blog. It was something I did monthly, sharing insights about the industry and advice for people navigating difficult workplace situations. This one felt particularly important. I looked directly into the camera and spoke from the heart. If your workplace treats you as replaceable, believe them. and replace them first. Your expertise has value. If they can't see it, find people who can. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's inevitable when you advocate for yourself with documentation, professionalism, and the courage to walk away from situations that diminish you. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The door that closes isn't a rejection. It's a redirection to where you actually belong. 3 months after leaving a company that offered me a 2% raise, I was offered partnership in a firm that valued my expertise. 1 year later, I'm running a division that's changing how companies think about algorithmic fairness and workplace attribution. I smiled at the camera. I walked into an HR office expecting a promotion from junior to mid-level. Instead, I got a wake-up call that showed me I'd been dreaming too small. They wanted to give me a 2% raise. I tripled my income. They wanted to own my ideas. I built a business around my expertise. They wanted to keep me in a box labeled low level. I broke out and built something they could never imagine. I leaned forward slightly. So here's my advice. When people show you they don't value you, thank them for the clarity. Then go build something they could never conceive of. Your worth isn't up for negotiation. It just is. And the sooner you believe that, the sooner you'll find yourself exactly where you're meant to be. I ended the recording and sent it to our communications team to publish. Then I closed my laptop, turned off my office lights, and headed home. It was Friday night, and I had a team dinner tomorrow to celebrate closing our 50th client engagement. Life was good. I was valued. I was respected. I was exactly where I belonged. And it all started with one word, spoken in an HR office to a woman who thought I was too junior to matter. Okay. The sweetest victory of all was realizing that walking away from their limitation had been walking toward my liberation. Have you ever been in a situation where someone undervalued your work or contributions? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and finding your worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not too junior, too inexperienced, or too anything to demand respect. And remember, your value exists whether others recognize it or not. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to walk away from anyone who makes you feel small. You deserve better, and better is waiting for you.